I hate when I get sick. It gets in the way of my videos, but man am I glad to be good again. So, let's get into it. Now, last video I covered we were seeing some very impressive feats by Negi versus Hiramaru, as well as some impressive inconsistency scaling, of course, with the curse marks and Choji versus Jirobo. However, now that I've had more time from being sick, allowed me and my infinite skepticism, towards myself included, to go back and really dive into feats past. So I'm going to continue covering speed here, but this video will also re-answer some AP points. This video will finish up the scaling of Naruto up to chapter about 235, but we're not there yet. First, we're going to continue the speed scaling, and so right after Negi defeated Hiramaru, we now have two of the Sound Force still moving through the forest. It's been half a day, and man, that's pretty inconsistent if they can move even close to Mach 1 speeds, but now we've seen the striking differences in who can have movement speed versus someone with combat speed. So this isn't necessarily a bad sign. A good sign of speed is this, where we can see that Sakhan easily dodges Kiba's piercing fang, nigh point blank, and in complete base. But then even better, Sakhan then moves, legit travels, faster than the very same piercing fang that passed him and helps to Yuya. Now, consistency is going to be very important, will always be a focus because, for example here, like I just said, he just easily outsped that piercing fang. When he goes Curse Mark 1, Sakhan is now even faster than that. Yet, imagine then Kiba just getting away so easily from that now same Curse Mark 1 Sakhan who's faster than his piercing fang with enough reaction speed to hang with that, what we've seen from Sasuke, in the tuning exam. What's happening here? So is Kiba not just, and this is also scaling against his own piercing fang. Is Kiba faster than his own piercing fang just jumping around? So this is the consistency part. Sakhan had a good feat, but what's the speed of piercing fang? This is what needs to be answered to make the original Sakhan feat truly impressive. It just comes off as maybe inconsistent. We need to know, right? Now, after Yuya had tried to hold off Shikimaru and Naruto, but failed via Shikimaru tricking her, we now see Naruto racing towards Kimimoto and freely going Zero Tails and catching up to Kimimoto very easily. We additionally get another perspective of those trees that made the height I was using in the last vid consistent, and we are now at Naruto versus Kimimoto. More like hundreds, if not that exact 1,000 Zero Tails Naruto's versus Kimimoto in fact, but there's of course more going on. So I am going to put the Kimimoto fight on hold because I really need to wrap up the less important fights. Well, I say less important for this video regarding speed. We're going to get to the most important one. Let's get there. Because at the same time, we have Kiba versus Sakhan, as well as Shikimaru versus Yuya. And since there's so much going on at once, I'll be breaking these fights down a bit faster. Firstly, Sakhan goes Curse Mark 2, increasing his chakra tenfold, something consistent with everything we've seen. This requires Kiba to use his strongest technique, and with his absolute strongest attack, he manages to catch Stage 2 Sakhan. However, it's important to note that it came from the saliva catching him, almost like a trap. You can see it in the top left of the panel here. This is not simply being so fast he could naturally tag Stage 2 Sakhan. Sadly, that ended up being about the only thing we can get from speed, so we never really get to know for sure how fast Sakhan is. Kiba scaling is weird, man. But I do have some AP scaling that's great, not just from this fight here, but for future scaling. And additionally, I will say, we also see that Sakhan was stated to perhaps be the strongest of the four. So he is at least relative, we know that much, but perhaps scaling above everybody else. Then again, we know Jirobo, who was considered the weakest, was physically the strongest. How much can we have any given person scale above another given person? It's just that Sakhan kind of lacks feats because Kiba is inconsistent. Curse Kiba, I don't know. He's weird. Anyway, I think now is a great time to go into the absolute most impressive feat regarding this entire arc. Let's cover Shikimaru versus Yuya. First, is Yuya's technique at least the speed of sound? By now, scaling for that isn't an issue. It works such that it requires her beast to hear it, and we see no evidence that the movement of the sound is changed or altered, manipulated any way, by any means, by her chakra, like we confirmed with Dosu. Eventually, she goes stage 2, when caught by Shikimaru, and once more, a confirmation that it's the chakra being that what goes up, not simply all stats, yada yada. And it's almost too obvious at this point, really. Now, Shikimaru can't win on his own, and finally, here we go, we get to Tamari. I'm sure you've seen this scan. What speed are we talking here? Because this is now absolutely fair to take at Mach 1. I'm talking about those sound notes, not sound notes, the sound like markings showing the genjutsu with it coming towards them. First things first, you can see at the edge to the fan all the lines I've talked about before. They did this with Tamari before, with the letters in front of them. Those lines, this is an example of showing movement of something within a singular panel. That is not Tamari's starting swing, she's been swinging by this top panel already. And the approaching sound, to give you some numbers here, is within a third to about half of a singular meter distance from Tamari, before the second panel. Additionally, she would not need to fully complete the swing as seen on the bottom panel to achieve the effect that we saw, blowing back the sound. What I'm telling you is that instead, merely bringing that massive fan in front of her would be the actual minimum required to prevent the sound from reaching her. There is no showing to prove the sound wouldn't have reached her if not for the wind knocking it back by the time she was finishing her entire swing. For this purpose, the minimum gives her just under 1/1000th of a second to swing several meters, and all in all, we're looking at a minimum, absolute minimum, of Mach 10. Mach 10! That's insane and something to watch out for, because is Tamari this fast? It would be a combat and reaction feat. You know, time has passed, right? Who's to say how strong she is at this point? Has she leveled up to this point, or is this simply an outlier? Negi, this is, and by outlier, I'm not going back to like Sakhan and Kiba. I'm not talking about outlier with them. I'm talking about just inconsistent, two different showings. Kiba being faster than his own, Piercing Fang, but Piercing Fang being attack usually that he uses to tag people that his normal moving speed isn't catching, but that's inconsistent. This would potentially be an outlier as it's inconsistent to the grand scheme of all the scaling of every other feat. If graphed, right, would make it very clear. Like, to put more numbers on this, Negi used 50 meters. Tamari is working with around a third of a single meter. I mean, this would dictate that Tamari would outbox Negi. I mean, she'd be throwing hands with him casually while he uses his 64 palm technique just to get smacked for being too slow 64 times himself. I mean, we'll see what this means for future scaling, but Mach 10 is 100% without a doubt the minimum for this feat. So lastly then, let's talk Kimimoto. The boy easily keeps up with all the Zero Tails Naruto clones from different angles and gets dangerously close to slashing Naruto until, dang, Lee is quick. And he sent Kimimoto back, like, pretty far too. How does Lee scale? Remember, he's not trained a day. He's in fact only gotten better recently and isn't even supposed to push himself. All this, and yet he's keeping up with base Kimimoto and is doing better than multiple Zero Tail clones at the same time. How does this make sense? I'll tell you, this is why scaling matters. This necessitates, once more, the gap between combat reaction and movement speed. Base Lee with no weights is faster than Zero Tails Naruto by a decently noticeable degree. I'm talking combat and definitely movement speed. It's shown only more so as Lee gets drunk and fights with Kimimoto, struggling to keep up, not just via being hard to read, but his speed. And don't act like him being drunk is a Zero Tails buff, like, now that's a funny thought, but it's not. It's not. He's just more unpredictable, but his speed is also causing this man trouble. And yet, multiple Zero Tails Narutos? So, it's simple. Base Lee is faster than Zero Tails Naruto. And this matters for the scaling. What this means is that while Naruto is insanely powerful, his speed is still lacking, and puts his one-tail version in much more light for what it pulls off against Sasuke and his Sharingan. It means the one-tails version, in terms of any speed and any increases we can see, means that much more compared to his Zero Tails. Eventually, Lee can't handle Kimimoto's bones, however, uses his initial Lotus, man he's still quick, but Kimimoto is able to use his bones to not need to even properly defend, catching his foot no less, and where of course Gaara shows up. Now, I'd love to finish the fight, it's a great fight, but in regards to speed, this is it. Even when looking at Naruto vs Sasuke, that fight itself, which I've already covered in a past video, when looking for speed, we don't find anything as fast as Lee in his gates. We don't find anything as fast as Neji's strikes, or especially Tamari's fan swing. So where does this put Naruto the series? Well, what we're looking at is Lee leading, and I'm talking about part 1 of course, I'm talking about just up to like chapter 235. Where does it put the series? Lee is leading the movement speed, still, despite no training at approximately that Mach 3 movement with all of his gates. Neji is leading the combat speed at Mach 2, unless Tamari is not an outlier. Kind of seems it so far, we'll see. Of which is, well, again, that's a Mach 10 combat speed. Whew. And then we have Neji leading in reaction speed of around Mach 6 per 50 meters, or 41.16 meters per second from a single meter's distance. Was that? The reaction speed wasn't a simple number like combat and movement speed. See, if you notice that just there, 41.16 meters, even if it wasn't the point, let's just say 41 meters per second from a single meter's distance. Like, see, just like how I use joules per centimeter cubed, when I'm talking about AP, it's important to understand reaction timings aren't about a single speed, but from the distance you're reacting. Can you react to something moving 1 foot a second? Of course, that's slow, right? Well, what about if its starting distance is a mere 2 centimeters from your face? You still able to react? Hell no. Anyway, I'm not going to ramble, but that's the purpose of this. The 41.16 meters per second of 1 meter's distance is the reaction speed part, and that of 1 meter's distance part will be my standard going forward. That said, to be fair to Sasuke, this is Neji leading via feats, but Sasuke would in fact lead via scaling by this point, but by a completely unknown amount. That wraps up the speed section for the video as well as to this point of the story, but yeah, I brought up AP before as well. Again, I like to double, triple check to make sure I'm accurate, and small building level total joules. Is that right? It is, the Rasengan I calced absolutely is, but is there more then? See, early on, Sasuke craters the ground with a fireball jutsu. Sasuke's Chidoris, while he's learning it, annihilates large chunks of rock. Naruto breaks Haku's ice mirror in Zero Tails mode. Taking a second look at Kidomaru's Aero, taking a second look at Neji's clash with Naruto and the remaining crater, we got some feats to look at. Let's get an idea on the strength of some of these feats. Sasuke's Fireball Jutsu is already mid-end small building level in total joules. This one this early. Why would I leave this out? The answer is that the Fireball is massive. Please understand that ultimately, I care about the joules per centimeter cubed, not simply the total joules. The total joules are easier to talk about, but the potency is what goes against durability, and that is joules per centimeter cubed. So in joules per centimeter cubed, which factors in the volume of the attack, is not even remotely impressive. The fireball's volume is simply too high. How about breaking Haku's mirror? It withstood that fireball jutsu, and that's the total joules, right? Yes, but again, across its entire space that the fireball was hitting. Again, the fireball itself is a wide AoE. When Naruto broke it, it was via the force being applied by merely a section of Haku's head. Now, I'm not saying it's not impressive for Naruto, simply that it tanking the fireball isn't exactly that strong of a rubric. Let me further address that fireball again here, since it plays a role in the mirror feat too. Its volume is easily 3 times that of Sasuke's entire body, and easily, say, like 800 times larger than his fist. If his fist and that fireball were to ever hit with the same total force, understand his fist would be around 800 times more potent. What this also means is that his fist could instead have 800 times less total force, but be equal in potency. This is just made up numbers that could work, but they're realistic numbers, and hopefully you see the point. The durability of the mirror being above the fireball doesn't mean much. Durability directly faces potency, not the DC or simply total force. Anyway, next would be Neji's clash with Zero Tails Naruto. Both clashing together results in building level total force. And if you split the total force in half, since both put in the energy, it comes out to higher end small building level total force for each. However, here's the problem. This is based on calculating what's left via that crater of rock. And I'd wager there is absolutely no proof any of this damage was from Naruto and his punch. There is the massive explosion, yes, but let's look in depth, okay? Just before this, Neji is sliding back to a position of ground of which there is no crater. Naruto charges in with his Zero Tails chakra, and Neji begins rotating. This is what causes a crater. You can see it before Naruto has even made contact. Then back to the explosion. That's impressive, and that would be the combined force of both clashing. But it's impossible to calc that explosion. We don't see it cause any destruction for us to actually calc. Then, Tenten correctly explains his rotation pushes out chakra as well. This would explain the explosion and would give credence to the crater having gotten bigger and deeper as he finished his rotation. If I just wanted to really try and push the point, it could be argued that the original crater we see here is in fact the better shot of the later crater seen here, and in fact, as we can see with the first crater, it'd be almost nothing. It'd be extremely weak. I don't, however, believe this. I believe the explosion and the completion of the rotation justifies, albeit the worst view of the crater, a larger calc that is based on now the second viewing of the said crater. All this is to mean is that Neji, having made the crater, which everybody scales, is with his rotation and his rotation alone, of which is calced to seem, based on what is being considered the most accurate for this feat. It's not having anything to do with the force of a Naruto punch here. Because if you remember, I was saying that their punches are, at this point, vastly weaker than the force of their techniques that they can put out. I still hold to that. And this would be another example why I don't think his punch scales to his rotation. But does this then mean that Neji can output lower end building level total force? Yes. But once again, why did I not focus on it as much as Naruto's Rasengan then? Once more, the answer is potency, the thing that actually matters. Consider once more the volume of his total rotation versus, say, Naruto's Rasengan. Look at the difference. that Rasengan is still many folds more potent, being many folds less volume for it to cause a nearly the same amount of total joules. So why am I showing all of this that I'm going over right now? It's because I want to show the consistency while answering potential questions of feats not delved into, or just to check back on the ones I've already delved into, and why I considered back then, small building level to be part 1 ending power. That's right, at the end of part 1 Naruto, small building level total joules. But it's partially my fault for once more using total force instead of joules per centimeter cubed, just because it's easier. That's me being lazy, like other people are lazy when they're calculating things. Naruto's Rasengan is around this many joules per centimeter cubed, and the point of that is that none of the other feats come close to this joules per centimeter cubed number, and that is the number that actually matters. But what if I did make a mistake? Let's look at the last 2 feats, Hiramaru's Aero and Sasuke's Chidoris. Not to stretch this out, so as quickly as I can, look, this Aero has 2 real showings. First, it craters the ground, as you can see, and that crater is fine. Good, actually, when you consider the small volume of the Aero, and I messed up the calc involving it. This Aero would absolutely be mid-end building level total joules. Again, I'm talking about total joules here. And its joules per centimeter cubed would actually be better than Naruto's Rasengan. This was my bad, 100%. That said, it also got stuck in a tree. Like a tree, yeah, so, I mean, it's weird, okay? Has 2 of those feats. However you're wanting to argue it, it's just weird. What about the Chidoris, though? Here's the thing. We don't get to see him actually strike the rock, like see the process of the rock being destroyed. And the process of how something's destroyed matters a lot. So there's 2 ways to go about this feat. Is it cratering? Or possibly even vaporization? Or the third, actually, a bit of both. But to what degree? It's impossible to tell. If it's all cratering, the total force is mid-end small building level. But if it's all vaporization, the total force is more around a higher end large building level. This is a stark difference in power, and I do believe that the answer lies somewhere in between. So in taking a lowball for accuracy, it's definitely safe to say its total force is at least mid-end small building level. But anyone saying it's around higher end building level, total force would be decently safe too, as that would be the middle between cratering and vaporization. That's acceptable. What does this ultimately mean? It means Chidori would in fact be just slightly more potent than Rasengan at this point in time, despite their showings on the water tanks. But I mean, all in all, while I hold that the final Chidori and Rasengan clash is impossible to count, we should feel fine scaling either one on its own to around higher end large building level, nearly breaching into lowest end city block total force, and both are lower volume attacks, meaning their potency is still very impressive. We're talking about this many joules per centimeter cubed, or we're talking enough energy to destroy a lower end small building within each and every cubic centimeter of space by their strongest moves in their strongest forms at this time. And that would be the AP of part 1 Naruto. Hopefully this covers absolutely everything, and I can start looking into the beginning of Shippuden, where the feats will only get crazier. I look forward to it, and so if you enjoyed this video, then I truly hope you consider subscribing, as I'll be putting out more. And make sure to comment below what you think about what's been shown here. I mean, anything surprising? I mean, it turns out the AP is slightly higher than what I thought. I mean, that surprised me, but it feels good knowing that the Chidori is in fact, even in feats, so closely matched to the Rasengan, right? Anyway, I'll see you around, and ciao.
Pastor.